Good morning. Good morning. How the devil are you doing this fine day? Well, I say fine day. It's bloody horrible out there. What is this? It's like where you are. Chucking it down, here it is. But I hope you're all fit and well. I've mentioned in the chat, I need you to bring your A game, and I'll explain why in just a moment. I don't know if you know this, but YouTube sends its channel hosts a monthly update on the performance of their channels. I got mine this morning, just before I came on here. During the month of September, we gained 2,958 new subscribers. Our videos got 3.2 million views. This is the one that blew my mind. People watched our content for an astonishing 967,000 minutes. I don't know what that equates to in terms of hours, but that's a lot of eyeballs. And as of today, they're going to have something more to watch and to consume as well. Because, okay, so I need to explain this. Having played with this new AI podcast system a bit more now, I thought I'd try something out last night. So I took the audio from our after show chat from Tuesday's show, fed it through to see what the AI made of it. And the result, frankly, was remarkable. I already know that the best bit of the most insightful bit of this show is basically when I take a step back and we deal with your comments and your insights and your ideas, your complaints, your hopes, your fears, your aspirations, and air them in public. Well, apparently the AI agreed. So if you're part of the WhatsApp group, you may have already heard the result. I must admit, I did make some mistakes doing the test. I didn't name the file properly, and I didn't give the AI any real context. But I've hopefully put that right. Now. I'm not entirely sure, but I think I have. It's going to require a bit of a period of learning, a bit of a learning curve and refinement. But starting today, I'm going to be capturing the after-show chat in our own dedicated podcast. It remains to be seen whether I will air it in public, but it will certainly be amongst us. So if you've got anything important that you'd like to share, please save it for after my morning monologue. And let's see if the AI actually selects your insight as part of the resulting podcast. Failing that, I'll do my best to highlight the best of the comments, and I'll stick them to one side, and we'll get back to that at some point in the show. Now, speaking of the morning monologue, I'm sure the expectation probably is that I would do something to mark Mental Health Awareness Day. Yeah, that's what others would do. But I've checked the bandwagon and I can see it's already filled with virtue signalers of every hue. So instead, my morning monologue is on the subject of creeping responsibility. How employers exploit the willingness of some workers to heap upon them additional roles, responsibilities, without compensating them in any way, shape, or form. So please stick around for that. Also, while I'm not planning to speak about the construction sector's mental health, there's nothing to stop you doing so, but just save it for the end of the show so the AI can hopefully include it. Now, I do need to go back and recap because I've said good morning to, I think I've said good morning to Dan and to Chris and to Jim. I haven't pressed the other buttons yet, but I will do that in just a moment. But Mark Whiting is here. Steve Williamson is here. Chris Ford is here. A couple of comments on the cap. Yes, the cap is, I don't know how well you can see that. It's actually a Ritchie Brothers cap, handed to me by the fine folks at Ritchie Brothers over in Mine Expo. I think it was pretty smart, actually. I quite like the colour scheme. I thought that bit there, I thought kind of went with the T-shirt. Sort of. Don't worry, Dan. What about the eyesight? I'm saving that for the end of the show. I've not forgotten. It's noted down. It's here. I'm ready to do it. Just going back to this idea of the after-show chat, the bit that we call the crack and the podcast from it. Would you like to see how the podcast would look? I'm sure you would. So this is one version of it. That is for YouTube, which I think looks pretty damn smart. And here's the other one. That is for the podcast artwork on iTunes and places like that. As you can see, we've gone proper old school for it. Got a microphone on there, but obviously got a lot of plant on there as well. Gone proper old school just to reflect the fact that, well, a lot of what we say and do here is old school. And as they say, ain't no school like an old school. So yes, that's how the new thing will look. So please stick with it. Let's have a look. Steve says, love the artwork. Thank you very much indeed. That looks great. Good stuff. Don't worry, Dan. He'll give it to you when you win the mystery machine. There are prizes for the mystery machine, which we'll get to in just a moment, but it won't be this hat because this is now worn, and I wouldn't want to give you I mean, there's nothing wrong with my head, but, it feels a bit wrong to give you a worn hat. So should we crack on before we get too bogged down in what's wrong with my head? I think that's plain for all to see. Without further ado, I'm going to roll the intro, post the question of the day, and get this show on the road. I must apologise. I'm still drinking my tea. Need it this morning. I'll explain why in just a moment. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. It is Thursday, the 10th of October. I am your host, Mark Anthony, the Walrus of Demolition. In today's show, Las Vegas said a very, very big and spectacular goodbye to the Tropicana Hotel yesterday. We've got an exclusive interview with one of the people behind the autonomous and battery electric hauler that will shape the future of mining. That's from Liebherr. Deitch's Quick Change Act. And Sunderland has a new bridge, but don't wear it out. When I wrote that, I was quite proud of it. I've just read it out loud. Not so much now. But today's morning monologue, we're going to be discussing creeping responsibility, how employers heap more and more roles and responsibilities upon individual workers, often without any additional financial compensation. But before we get to all of that, we do have the small matter of today's mystery machine. So I'll show you the mystery machine because there's been some activity in the chat, as there always is. But let me start with this. This is the machine I need you to identify. And as always, what I would like from you is a make and a model. Pretty specific today. So yes, make and a model. Question of the day, which I will remind you of in just a moment. We already had some answers on it. Let's have a look. Chris Ford says, nothing wrong with my head either. I only get splinters when I scratch it. Well done. What have we got here? That intro must have taken Fred a while to do. It did. That's why we tend to space out the redesign of this show. We did a redesign for the 100th show. We did another one for the 500th show. The next redesign is for the 1,000th show, purely because it is a very, very time-consuming thing to do. Dan Cullen says, ooh, a new bridge. Yes, a new bridge. We'll be coming back to that in just a moment. Mick Norton has just joined us. Thank you very much indeed for being here, Mick. Ken Hatcher reckons our mystery machine could be a case 580K. It is not. You're not a million miles away, but it is not. Shall I show you a bit more? Well, that's completely unhelpful. I know what it is. Dan Cullen is going for the 580G. It is not the 580G either. Keep the guesses coming in. Now, I said I was going to remind you of our question of the day, and I shall do so. Yeah, this morning's question of the day comes once again from our resident quizmaster, Gary Muirhead. Now, I say resident, I haven't spotted Gary yet. His breaks at the moment on the job that he's on are actually at 11, so he may well be along a bit later on, but he's very kindly provided us with a question of the day. And his question is this: what do you do to unwind after work? Personally, I don't. Not really. I do step away from the big computer, but I generally just open up the little computer and carry on. I spend my evenings and weekends researching stuff for the show, checking out new tech that will make the show video, or the show or our video output better. And that's fine, to be perfectly honest. I spend my working day sat on my arse. So, most strenuous thing I do is lift a cup of tea to my chop. So, not a major deal. But what about you? Now, we've already had a few answers on this. What have we got here? Question of the day. Yeah, Jim Taylor says, more work. But when I've actually finished and get home, I jump in the shower and just stay in there for ages relaxing, mostly with a drink before I have my tea which is dinner. Yes, indeed. How did we end up with that, by the way? I mean, I realise the regional accents, and I realise we have different expressions for things, as we've already discovered, particularly with our friend Jim. But how did we end up with the point where I come from, down south, dinner is called dinner. You go further up the country, it becomes tea. And what about what you call, what I would refer to as a roll, a bread roll? Why does that change name as you go north? Never worked that out. Steve Williamson says he unwinds with a good series of wife. Menendez Brothers is the one at the moment. I finished the latest series last night of Slow Horses. Magnificent. I say that as somebody that is a huge, huge fan of Gary Oldman, so maybe I'm biased, but Slow Horses on Apple TV. Very, very good indeed. Our friend Mick says, when I did work full-time, I liked to bake. See, this is why we have the question of the day. I've never met Mick face-to-face. I've spoken to him on the phone and on Zoom and stuff like that. In all my days, I never had Mick down as a closet baker. Now I've become friends with a certain part of the bar. Yeah, well, that's more how I saw you. But yeah, a baker. Did not know, but fair play. Chris Ford says, unwinding, beer, darts, shooting, playing the guitar. Well, I make a noise. Not always in that order. That's the Andre Previn thing, isn't it? I'm playing all the right notes, not necessarily in the right order. Wow, that's late. My dinner is usually between 9 p.m. and 11:30, depending on the time of year. You're almost a Spaniard at that point, Jim. Those buggers, and the Italians, 10 o'clock. Yeah, that's dinner time. Dinner time at 10 o'clock. Right, going back to the Mystery Machine. Let me throw that back. I'm on the, just going to say very quickly. Mick says, underrated actor is Gary Oldman. I totally agree. I think he is. Him and Tim Roth, finest of their generation, would be my point on that. Dan Cullen reckons our Mystery Machine could be a New Holland. It's not. Steve reckons it could be the Cat 434 Bacco. It's not. Mark Whiting is going for the Case 580 SLE. It's not. The Case 580 EV from Ken Hatcher. It's not. Dan Cullen go for the Wolf 180. It's not that. Dan Cullen go for the Firmec. It's not. The 580G. It's not the 580K. It's none of those things. But keep the guesses coming in. I'll show you a bit more just to be absolutely fair. There you are. I can tell you, you're all very, very close. But I'm looking for specific makes and models, and nobody's got the right combination thereof as yet. So please keep the guesses coming in. What do we got here? Tea was always in the afternoon around 4 p.m., then dinner at 8. Yeah, that's kind of, having said that, and I don't even know where this came from, but I do remember as a kid really warming to the notion of supper, which to my mind was always that bit after dinner where you fancy something more to eat, which is generally. I'll get on with the show in just a moment, but I wanted to share this very, very quickly. I went on a cruise once, and I went with a couple of friends of ours, and they said, the cruise food's always available. He said, but watch the people. He said, you can sit down to a 3-course meal, and then there'll be an announcement that there's, I don't know, cake or something like that on offer, and people will literally run to make sure they get their cake. And I thought, well, that's lunacy, surely. So we sat down, we had a 3-course meal, and you know how you sort of kind of sit in the bar afterwards and you're absolutely full to the brim. You can't find room for another scrap of food. And an announcement came out that said they are now serving lasagna in one of the bars. And the 4 of us looked at each other and went, lasagna then? And we went and had lasagna on top of a 3-course dinner. Disgraceful behaviour. Let's have a look. What have we got here? Going back to the Mystery Machine. Ken Hatcher reckons it could be the 580N from Case. It's not. Dan Cullen going for the 580 SV-S. It's not. Chris Ford going for the Case 770EX. It's not that either. Here's a smidge more. There you are. Definitely on wheels. Dan Cullen is also going for the 770. It is not one of those. I'm going to take that away for a moment because we do need to start the show, and we've got something explosive to show you just after this. I don't know quite how he managed it, but yesterday you might recall that Ken Hatter was watching this show apparently with one eye, and he had his eye on YouTube with the other eye, because yesterday the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas was blown up, blown down, imploded, exploded. It came down. There was explosives. There was also a lot of fireworks as well. In actual fact, the fireworks went on for about 5-6 minutes. I've condensed all of that. Now, just one thing to be aware of. Obviously, this took place in the early hours of the morning in Las Vegas, so that people could see the fireworks and the drone display that went on with it, quite possibly so people couldn't see the dust that resulted from it. But here's the highlights of yesterday's Tropicana implosion. It's an awful lot of build up for just 5 or 6 seconds of action. But yeah, the Tropicana's gone. I mentioned this yesterday. I was actually stood right by that 2 weeks ago. I actually took the drone up, flew it over to the site to just give it a last look, to be perfectly honest with you. That apparently is going to be a new baseball stadium, which interestingly, while we were in Las Vegas, like I say, 2 weeks ago, there was a couple of football games, American football, obviously, American football games in town. And the Allegiant Stadium, which is beautiful, by the way, the Allegiant Stadium is like a short walk away from the Luxor Hotel, which is where I'm staying. There's also right next door to the Luxor is the esports arena. And now there's going to be a baseball stadium directly opposite the Luxor. So I would imagine on match days, either football or baseball, the Luxor is going to be mighty busy, and good luck to them, because I really quite like it there. Now we're going to go back to the mystery machine. Lots and lots of guesses. Let me have a look. Let's have a look. Mick says tea was always in the afternoon around 4. Yeah, we've done that one. Mick says, well, I came from a posh family. Like, fuck, I did. Yeah, me too. Me too. Yes, the council estate in Battersea, which is dead posh. Right, we've got guesses aplenty here on the Mystery Machine, none of which are correct. Jim Turner says, but if we're talking unwinding with a day out or activity, a steam rally, agricultural show, ploughing match, plant show, or shooting. Sounds like a good mix. Mick Norton says, for working class Brits and Aussies, dinner is tea. Yeah, it wasn't in my house. Maybe I live too far south. Maybe I have middle-class aspirations. I really don't. I know where I'm from. I know what my roots say. Right, going back to the Mystery Machine. 590 SV from Dan Cullen from Case. It is not. The 595 SV, it's not one of those either. The B115D from New Holland, it's not. Jim Turner reckons it could be a high dreamer. It's not. Chris Ford. The Mechalak 990, it is not. Let me show you a smidge more. There you are. I don't think that's going to be very helpful, but that's what you've got. Good morning to Joe Brown Construction over in the mighty United States. I think he's in one of the bits that isn't affected by the storms that are going on at the moment. I hope you're fit and well, my friend. Hope you're safe and well as well. Awful situation over in Florida at the moment. Wouldn't want to be there, and it does. I do find it remarkable. We were talking about this last night when we were coming back from a trip out while we were in Las Vegas. We were talking to the taxi driver, female taxi driver, and she was saying it was very, very hot while we were there, 40 degrees or thereabouts. And she said when the temperature in Fahrenheit tops 105 degrees in Las Vegas, she basically parks her car up and doesn't work because ultimately it will take its toll on the car. We think about maybe some of you guys up in Scotland and stuff like that. Maybe you do have to work your life around the weather conditions, but imagine being in somewhere like Florida or Louisiana or somewhere like that, where you're on basically in the destruction path of a hurricane once, twice, 3 times a year, and having to batten down the hatches and knowing full well that at some point in the not too distant future you could potentially lose everything. Not sure I could live with that. We'll be back after this.
If you are enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the show. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.
Yeah, Mick says, Florida, beautiful place, but sod living there. Just hope there are not too many deaths there. Yeah, it looks bloody awful. I'm sure we'll be starting to get the figures in the not too distant future. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be there at all. And Dan Cullen is going for our mystery machine. He's going for the 600 SV. Nope, still not right. Getting closer all the time, but still not right. Now, we showed you the launch of the Liebherr T264. Or we actually showed you the launch of the battery electric autonomous version of said machine. Well, we got to speak exclusively, I think, to one of the people behind the development of that machine. And I'd like to show that to you now because he will tell you a lot more about the machine and what it's planning to do.
My name is Derek Albin. I am a general manager for sales at Liebherr Mining Equipment Company, where we build the off-highway trucks. Probably the best mine expo I've been to. I've been with the company for almost 30 years now. Super exciting, great collaboration between the companies. Fortescue has very aggressive zero-emission targets, very aggressive compared to the rest of the industry. Looking at 2030 to be zero emission, right? We found a collaboration between both parties where we work together with them, and we put battery modules in our 264 mining truck, also equipped with autonomous haulage system. And by doing that, we're putting in 360 of these trucks into Western Australia to help them with their iron ore processing. We have an agreement partnership where they will be able to sell and promote these products with other customers too as well. So as an industry, we're hyper-focused right now to bring a solution to the industry with our two companies. But beyond that, when we go further down in years and years, then they'll be open up to other people in the industry too as well. Liebherr is always very open to be a solution provider. We like technology, we like engineering, we like working with a customer to find things that maybe other OEMs may not use, and we like to listen first before we speak a lot. And we stumbled across this company and this opportunity. They said, this is what we're looking for. We might not be able to do this with another OEM. Is that something that Liebherr is interested in? Those are the words that we love to hear is, would you like to help us with a solution? And the answer was obviously yes. So a couple of years later, we're here with Fortescue going down the zero emission path, very accelerated, aggressive goals and targets that we're meeting. And it's just super exciting and wonderful to be a part of the collaborative group.
Some machine, right? I'm going to say this. Mix just said those tires are bigger than my garage doors. They certainly are. On the subject of that machine, obviously that is battery electric. We have done one of our podcasts on electric machines and the future thereof. You can find it over on YouTube, but you can also go to any good podcast platform, search for Demolition News Radio. It is our latest episode, so if you'd like to give that a listen, you can do that. But I can tell you we do have a winner on our mystery machine. I will show it to you just to prove exactly what it is. That right there is the case 695 SV. And the correct answer came from, no huge surprise, Dan Cullen. Dan Cullen has extended his lead once again. So Dan, you I think you're on 12 points at the moment. I think you are well in the lead, although where are we? 10th of October, we've got a good 2.5 weeks of, well, we've got 3 weeks, but 2.5 weeks of actual shows. So keep the guesses coming. Oh, well, no, don't keep the guesses coming in. There's still plenty of time for everybody else to catch up with Dan Cullen. Congratulations, Dan. Ken Hatcher was remarkably close. He went for the Case 695 ST. It's the SV. I actually wanted to do the 580 EV, the electric version for this morning's show. Could I find a decent photograph of it? Could I, buggery? We're going to be right back in just a moment. Let me do away with that. There's Dan Cullen saying thank you. We'll be back in a moment talking quick couplers and Dici. We make no secret of the fact that we love quick couplers here on the show. The ability to change attachments quickly makes you more profitable, makes you more productive, and so on down the line. So, with that in mind, this. Dan Cullen says, new Case brand come out, a 3.6 litre V6 Cummins engine, stage 5, 110 horsepower. When's that? Where's that? Tell me more. I'd love to hear about it. We're going to be right back after this with a brand new bridge up in Sunderland.
Since the finance bill came into effect in April, the construction industry has seen a surge of fuel thefts. The rising cost of living has placed an additional risk of theft by employees and contractors, as well as opportunistic thieves. By using diesel dye and placing warnings of its use, you are sending a clear message that this is your fuel.
Thanks, Dan. He was actually talking about the Case 695 SV. Yeah, the biggest model in their range, I think. Fairly sure that's the case. Yes, I promised you a new bridge, and a new bridge you shall have. Sunderland has got a new bridge over the Weir. You know, Tyne and Weir? Well, this is the Weir bit. New bridge. Looks like this. Very smart. Very smart indeed. What am I going to do? I'm going to roll the end of show stinger in just a second before leaping gazelle-like over into the morning monologue, and then obviously the crack after that. If you can't stick around for that, then please stay safe, look after yourself, your family, your friends, and your colleagues, and I hope to see you again very soon. But if you do have the time and the inclination, I will be back with my morning monologue in just a moment. And don't forget, we always record the after show chat, but we're going to try to capture it for posterity today, just to see how that all pans out. So if you've got any comments, hopes, fears, aspirations, concerns, issues that you'd like to raise, please do so in just a moment. But I'll be back after this. When you signed your employment contract, assuming you've got one, it probably laid out your tasks and hours pretty clearly. Maybe 9 to 5 with a set of defined responsibilities that matched your job title. But at some point that night, let me try it again. But at some point that nice, neat package began to unravel. The hours started stretching. First you were staying a few minutes late, then half an hour, and now a 10-hour day feels like the norm. There was a time when you worked on a Saturday every so often. Now it's every Saturday and some Sundays too. And as for those responsibilities, well, they've quietly multiplied. Suddenly you're managing projects, learning new technologies, training others, and taking on tasks you never imagined were part of the deal. That is the insidious nature of creeping responsibility, a slow but steady expansion of your work hours and duties without corresponding changes to your contract, let alone your paycheck. It's a pervasive problem in today's workplaces, and it often goes unnoticed until it feels too late to push back. But here's the thing. While employers undoubtedly benefit from this creep, we as workers sometimes unintentionally help it along. Let's start with the obvious. Employers love a flexible worker. They love someone who can wear many hats, especially when they don't have to pay any extra for each new hat added to that wardrobe. Companies often talk about going above and beyond or being a team player. It's framed as a badge of honor to take on more than you originally signed up for, whether it's learning the latest software or stepping in to manage a team because a co-worker is out. That slow accumulation of extra responsibilities happens so incrementally that it's easy to miss. Maybe it starts with one extra project that feels manageable, but soon it's a new technology you're expected to master without any formal training or additional pay. Before long, the job you were hired for looks entirely different from the one you're actually doing today. The scary part, obviously, is that this creep is rarely compensated. Your paycheck remains the same, even though your responsibilities and the stress they bring have multiplied. The time you were supposed to spend outside of work now belongs to your employer. Creeping responsibility eats away at work-life balance, leaving employees overwhelmed, burned out, and in many cases underpaid for the expanded scope of their work. But here's where it gets complicated. As much as creeping responsibility is driven by companies looking to get more work for the same pay, we as workers sometimes fall into a trap that exacerbates the problem. We're often too willing to say yes, too willing to adopt tasks and projects as our babies. Why do we do that? I think it's partly a survival instinct. In a world where jobs can feel precarious and competition is fierce, saying no can sometimes feel like career suicide. We all want to be seen as valuable, irreplaceable even. We think that by being the go-to person for every task or by treating every project like it's our personal baby, we'll secure our position. In doing so, we unintentionally reinforce this creeping responsibility dynamic. Take this example. You're asked to stay late to finish a project because you're seen as the best person for the job. You do it once, thinking it's a one-time thing. Then it happens again and again. Soon it becomes expected that you'll always be available after hours. Or maybe a new software tool is introduced, and without official training or extra time, you're left to figure it out on your own. You embrace the challenge. After all, you're dedicated to doing the best job possible. But soon it's expected that you'll master every new tool without question, even if it means sacrificing your evenings or weekends. This is the crux of the problem. By being too willing, we sometimes make ourselves complicit in our own overwork. The consequences of this behaviour aren't just individual. When workers continuously accept more responsibilities without pushing back or asking for fair compensation, it sets a precedent. Over time, this overwork becomes normalised, not just for you, but for the entire workforce. Employers come to expect it, and it becomes embedded in the company culture. At first, the extra effort might feel rewarding, like you're proving your worth. But over time, it will ultimately lead to burnout. Your passion for the job starts to wane as the weight of never-ending responsibilities grows heavier and heavier. And once that happens, it becomes harder to draw a line between what you're willing to do and what you're expected to do. The personal project you once took pride in becomes a burden that you can't shed. And that's when creeping responsibility really takes hold. So how do we fight back against creeping responsibility? When the obvious answer lies in redefining boundaries, both personally and within our workplaces. But it's not easy. In an industry in which even the most willing and loyal workers are seen as expendable and replaceable, telling your employer what you will and will not do is fraught with danger. With that being said, companies should appreciate employers for their core strengths, not just for how many extra roles they can juggle. Creeping responsibility doesn't have to be inevitable. By recognizing its subtle onset, understanding how we sometimes contribute to it, and establishing clear boundaries, you can protect yourself and your colleagues from falling into the trap of unpaid overwork. Workers deserve fair compensation for the full scope of their roles, no more, no less. And maybe, just maybe, we all need to be just a little bit less willing at times. Just to very quickly put this into context and to show I'm every bit as guilty of this as everybody else. Back when I was on the magazine Plant Manager's Journal, we had a monthly press day because it was a monthly magazine, so we had a monthly press day. The entire team would spend all month researching, writing, visiting sites, visiting machines. But press day was the last day upon which the magazine was assembled. It was the day on which the specific content of the magazine was finally decided and compiled. Press day was so vitally important that the entire editorial team was expected to be in the office. But not long after I became deputy editor, my boss, the editor, decided to be off on holiday for a press day. Not a problem. I knew what I was doing and I got the magazine out on time. The next month, he was absent for press day again. And the month after that. And the month after that. Because I treated each issue as my baby, he knew I'd be there, even if I was sick and even if it meant working through the night. And so through his laziness and my willingness, press day became my job. I wasn't paid anymore. I wasn't given time off in lieu. My efforts were not recognised at all. I was basically mugged off. I'm going to go over to the chat in just a second, but I want to... This is the point that Dan Cullen was making. Dan sent me a message on WhatsApp this morning. He sent me a link about a car driver lost his license. The guy was stopped for speeding, and after he was stopped for speeding, they obviously the Rozzers decided there was something wrong. The guy's eyesight was so poor he could only see roughly half the distance required by law, and it set Dan and ultimately me thinking: how many machine operators are there out there with deteriorated eyesight? Now, obviously, if you're doing 30, 40, 60, 70 miles an hour in a car, not being able to see properly is a major issue. But if you're working on an excavator and you've got people working down in a trench or close by, it's a danger there as well. So please throw that into the mix as well. So, let me go back to the chat. So, Chris Ford says, fantastic piece of engineering. Derbyshire can't even replace a temporary Bailey Bridge that was put in place after the floods of 1947. Derbyshire sounds like me. I must have mentioned this before. First house that myself and my girlfriend at the time, who was now my wife, we moved into a house and it needed a replacement front door. So I bought a replacement front door and I rubbed it down and I primed it and I painted it and I undercoated it and I painted it and then I gave it a top coat. We lived there for 3 years. And when we left, that newly painted, fresh front door was still in the back bedroom. Yeah. Dan Cullen says, this is going back to our creeping responsibility discussion. On the books, you're only meant to work 39 hours a week pending contract, and after is overtime and holiday pay, pension, etc. Compared to self-employed, you get no contracts. Only contract is with scrupulous payment contractors charging you to pay your wages. Not sure what that last bit means, but yeah. This has been inspired by so many different conversations that I've had with individual operators and operatives and people that work in construction. And I realize a lot of you are working on a subcontracted basis or you're working through an agency or whatever, but you're expected to be here. I mean, let's say, your day starts at 7:30. So your ending is maybe 4:00 in the afternoon, but it's not. 7:30 becomes 7 because you want to beat the traffic. And while you're there, you're expected to go to work. You'll probably work through your lunch hour as well. And 4:00, we've just had some concrete arrive. So 4 becomes 5, becomes 6, becomes 6:30. And all of a sudden, you've gone from a reasonable amount of time to an extended amount of time. That's the point that I'm thinking of. Many people don't actually read the contract and presume it's a 44-hour week. Yeah. And we'll come back to the chat in just a moment. And I know Jim Turner's got some points on this, and Mick has got some points on it as well. But that's the point. I think it's because, and I'm sure this is the same across any industry, but particularly I think in construction, there is always somebody else that will do your job available. Whether they'll do it as well as you is almost beside the point. But if you were to throw up the shutters and say, I think that's enough. I've done 12 hours today. I did 12 hours yesterday. I did 12 hours the day before. I think we need to have a chat about compensation or about time off in lieu or about getting the job done in the time. I think you could be made to feel rather unwelcome, and you could be replaced without too much trouble as well. And that, I think, is where construction is perhaps worse than other industry sectors, because people are seen as expendable, particularly in the age where we've got a lot of people on agency work. If somebody takes against your attitude to working extended hours without additional pay, they can find a reason to get rid of you. And frankly, if they got rid of you this morning, they'd have a replacement in this afternoon. That's the difference, and that's why I thought it was an article worth doing. Jim Turner says, that's easy. When the job changes, the responsibility or workload raises, so does my wage rate. I'll come back to that point in just a moment. I'll finish Jim's comment, though. As soon as I'm not totally happy with my job, I get in touch with my employer. We have the crack, and it either gets sorted or I'll jack and start for someone else. I think they know this is not an idle threat, as I've been here for 10 years and kept happy so far. Yeah, I think one of the issues you've got, I mean, Jim, obviously, we've discussed this before, and I mean this in the nicest possible way. Jim has got his opinions, and he's got quite a forceful way about him, and I think he's, in the nicest possible way, he's big enough and ugly enough to stand up for himself. Which was the case when I was back on Plant Manager's Journal. I was the youngest person on that magazine, probably by about 10 years. I was still green, wet behind the ears and everything else. I didn't dare go to my boss and say, yeah, do you know what? I think you're taking the piss. You're landing me with all this additional responsibility. I didn't dare. And I think in the age of a lot of agency workers, I think that's the case. I think, Jim, if you've got that relationship with your employer, then fair play to you. And 10 years, you should be able to have the to and fro and the crack to get things like that resolved. And maybe your aura, your presence means that people won't impose upon you in that way. But there's lots and lots of people out there that will, in fact, be imposed upon to an incredible degree. Dan Cullen, on a slightly different matter, says, see the expense of the Thames crossing now exceeded 800 million as operative. How much it will actually cost? Not sure what that means. You just said workers are doing more and more than what they were hired for. This now takes place of artisans of their trade. Jack of all trade is okay for bits and pieces. This is Mick Saunders speaking, rather. The problem being you then lose a trained worker in a certain trade, if you get my drift. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And, that that ability, we have people in our midst. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to get them in trouble with their employers, but we do have people in our midst who are every bit as culpable and as guilty of what we're talking about here. You know, they've taken on a role. You want me to do that as well? Yeah, I'll do that. And that as well? Yeah, I'll do that. And you want me to train the new guy? Yeah, I'll do that. And sooner or later, you know, you find your working day doing this and this and this. And you've gone from, using Mick's example there, you've gone from being a specialist to being somebody that is seen as a jack of all trades. Oh, you know, we something new's coming up. Get Bob on it. Bob will deal with that. You know, Bob deals with everything. Which is fine, you know, if Bob's happy with that, if Bob's got no home to go to, if Bob is being able, suitably compensated, but that's not always the case. It certainly wasn't the case when I was on Plant Manager's Journal by any means. It was just, here's another thing, here's another thing, here's another thing. You know, we started liaising with the Kent Constabulary to try and put a stop to plant theft. That was an additional responsibility. We had we used to do supplements for the magazine, which was over and above what I'd signed up for. But it was, that sounds interesting. I'll do that. Didn't get paid for it. We did supplements. We did exhibition coverage. You know, we learned new technology. I learned to do this job on a sit-up and beg typewriter, and then I was handed a laptop. There wasn't an instruction manual. I wasn't sent on a training course. It was, here's a laptop, go figure it out. And I had to do that. And then once I'd learned it, I basically had to teach the rest of the office. At no point did anybody say, you know, here's a couple of extra quid in your pay packet. Just expected. Mick says, there's still a few Bailey bridges in use in Belgium and France, spanning small rivers. I quite like to see them. I must admit, I do like to see them. And I particularly like it when temporary construction works, you know, where they're building a new motorway or something like that, and they put one in just to service the equipment. Do like a Bailey bridge. Fabulous feat of engineering. Chris, no, it's not. It's Dan Cullen says, I was talking to a guy yesterday. His company hired 2 guys, had all the tickets God sent, and they had no actual clue on how to operate or start the equipment they held cards for. These companies don't check the legitimacy of cards. Cards may be cheap but dangerous. I think you're absolutely right. Dan Cullen says, when I start my job, I'll talk to the hierarchy and say my bit, as if you want me to do something else, I will require a few extra pounds for doing X, Y, and Z to comprehend my responsibilities I'm paid for. I think that's part of it. And I think that goes back to the point that Jim was making. I think Jim, as I say, because of the way he is, who he is, and the fact that he's been with that company for 10 years, I think he early doors, I think he's laid down the rules of, you know, I'll do things, but, you know, I expect to be compensated for them. And if I'm not compensated for them, I will be heading for the door. I think the problem you've got, and bearing in mind, I think part of this comes back to an issue of age. I think the older you get, and, you know, I mean, Jim and Dan, both of whom are putting up objections to my point, both of them are, I don't know, what are you, in your 40s, 50s? I couldn't possibly guess. Doesn't matter. But you're an older generation. You think about the number of people, you know, we've got an aging population within the demolition and construction industry. We've got people being forced out by the end of grandfather rights. So we've got a younger and younger workforce. If you're 18, 19, 20, you're fresh out of college, you're fresh out, you know, you literally just got your first competence card. Are you going to your boss saying, it says here that I work from 8 till 4. You will not get a minute more out of me? Are you? Because certainly when I was that age, I wouldn't have had that conversation. It goes. Mick says it. All it goes back is to no. All it goes back to is this: nobody wants to pay someone for what he's worth or his trade value. Just greed at the end of the day. Yeah, and unfortunately, I do think. I think some in this industry go like lambs to the slaughter. I think there is an over-willingness among the workforce, but let's be absolutely honest here. I think that willingness is all too often exploited. And I mean, I don't for one moment think that management of any construction or demolition company are holding meetings saying, oh, you know, Bob, he'll do anything. Get him on the case. We won't pay him a bean, but he'll do anything. But I do think that becomes kind of endemic after a while. And I mentioned it in the thing there. You know, if you've got somebody that is willing to do anything, I've got a football analogy in a second, but I think if you've got somebody that's willing to do anything, to go the extra mile or whatever, I think that sets a standard. Going back to football, as I've just mentioned, when Cristiano Ronaldo went back to Manchester United, it turned out badly in the end for everybody concerned. But Cristiano Ronaldo is, in my personal opinion, the greatest footballer ever, quite simply. And he has created himself. He was a pretty skinny kid when he was at Man United the first time around. And he decided that if I'm going to really prosper in this game, I've got to go away. I've got to get bigger and more muscular and faster and more aggressive and everything else. And he basically built himself like that. So when he went back to Man United, he was the first in training. He was the last out of training. He would practice free kicks for hours on end. He would train harder than everybody else. He would bring in his own nutritionist to make sure that his body was absolutely in prime condition. And part of the deal with that was the hope, I think, at Man United, that his additional effort would bring up everybody else. You know, a rising tide raises all the boats. As it turns out, Man United is mainly populated by very, very lazy players. It didn't work. But I think if you've got somebody in your midst, you know, be it a Dan Carlin or a Steve Williamson or whoever, that is very willing, very eager, very adept at taking on new challenges, that becomes the accepted and expected norm. And I think that's the issue that we've got. Let's have a look. Dan Cullen, I agree, Mick. Yeah, yes, it's unscrupulous companies, I think, pushing you to exploit you to do more than you're paid for, as you're the go-to man on the job. Yeah, and don't we all want to be that? Don't, you know, there's, like I say, I do think we're kind of like lambs to the slaughter. I personally want to be the go-to guy. You know, if we're doing a job for a company or whatever it might be, it's something I've tried to instill in Fred. Under promise, over deliver. So if we say we're going to do a 2-minute video for somebody, let's make it 2.5. If we say we're doing 1 video for somebody, let's do 2 or 3. Whatever it is, we'll do a thing and then we'll go above and beyond. The problem with that, and I realise this is a fault of my own, the problem with that is once you've done that, that is now the expected. So the next time somebody phones you up and says, oh, you worked for us back at Con Expo, we'd like you to do the same again at Balmer. Okay, what's the rate? Well, same rate as last time. Good. And they're sat there thinking, we'll pay for 1 video, but we know full well that they'll give us 3. And as a result, if you don't give them 3, they come back and go, what the fuck's going on here? Well, we've been shortchanged. Well, hang on. The agreement says, yes, but last time becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mick says, God Arse wants to rebuild the brickwork. Excuse me. Mick says, God Arse wants to rebuild the brickwork on a manhole. I sort of hit with the bucket. After my endeavours, it cost more to break it out and rebuild it. A brickie could have done it and would have been a lot cheaper than me. But you're there and you're willing, and therein lies the problem. And when you think about the way that I've said, this is the most exciting time. I've been doing this job for 35 years. Right here, right now is the most exciting time to be talking about the developments and innovations in plant and equipment. You know, we've got electric machines coming on board, hydrogen not far behind them. We've got GPS and sat-nav, quick couplers, multiple attachments. There's so much going on at the moment, which from my point of view is fantastic. The issue is if you're on site, you know, and your company decides to go down the GPS route or to go down the quick coupler route or to go down the remote control route, is the conversation going to be, we're going down this route, therefore you can have some additional money? Or is it a case of, we're going to go down this route, learn it, and do it? And I think that's probably more the case. Jim Turner says, a new starter won't get treated like I do because they can get another one like most of them easily. But they know someone that does what I do is much harder. So I'm worth more and need keeping sweet. goes back exactly. And Jim, I agree with everything you've just said there. I totally agree. And he does actually say a follow-up. And I know I'm that person, so I take no shit. The problem is, as I say, when you've got, I mean, I'm going to guess that Jim's probably in his 40s or thereabouts. So chances are he's probably got 20, 25 years under his belt. If you've only got 6 months, a year, 5 years under your belt, can you have that Can you have that conversation? Can you go to your employer and go, yeah, I'll take on GPS. It sounds interesting. It sounds exciting. It is definitely a way forward. But I'm going to have to learn this in my own time. Or are you going to give me time off? Or are you going to send me to day release college? Probably not. Are you going to have that conversation? And again, I do think a lot of it is down to the fact that one of the things that comes up in conversation on this show a lot, and I know it's something that Dan Cullen beats the drum about a lot, and Gary Muirhead as well, and I think others, is the importance of being seen as valuable to your employer and a part of the team that your employer employs. And I think the moment that you start to take a step back from that and say, hang on, maybe, but can we have a chat? I think you potentially, depending on who the employer is, I think you are basically potentially committing career suicide, because all of a sudden you've gone from the willing guy to the unwilling guy, and who wants somebody unwilling in their midst? Because much as I've said about the fact that if you are the go-to guy that will go above and beyond and you then set the precedent, if you're the unwilling guy, you're also setting a precedent that could impact upon the rest of the workforce. And nobody wants that kind of thing in their midst. Oh, let's have a look. Dan Carter says, totally agree, Jim. I'm similar. Take no shit from anyone either. Because both Jim and Dan, and probably others in our midst, have earned that right. What if you haven't earned that right yet? That's the point. Mick says, gents, I'm off. Stay safe. Make sure you get your worth. Need to push the trolley around Waitrose, walk the hound and fall into the pub. Catch you on the morrow. Well, enjoy Waitrose. Enjoy the pub. I'm sure you'll do both. Give my best to the hound. I'll see you soon, Mick. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. So yes, that's pretty much the show done for today, unless anybody's got any more to add. Just want to go back, and I did mention it, but I'm going to mention it again. This point about that Dan Cullen raised about eyesight. I mean, I realise eyesight is just one of a multitude. Chris Ford, I'm full of shit. I think I may have COVID. I hope not. Yes, going back to the point that Dan raised about eyesight. I've got a friend who is an occupational nurse who works within the demolition construction industry, and she is on a regular basis uncovering undiagnosed problems, from hearing loss, eyesight loss, and to heart disease and various other bits and pieces. How many people out there are working in construction with eyesight that is not as good as it should be? As I say, I'd like to think that everybody driving at 70 miles an hour on the nation's motorways has perfect 20/20 vision. I know that's probably not the case, but I'd like to think that. But if I'm on a dumper, I know the rules, I know you're supposed to get off, but if I'm on a dumper, if I'm working in or by a trench and there's somebody driving an excavator, I'd like to think that they too have 20/20 vision. Have they? And if they haven't, is that part of a regular health screening? If it isn't, should it be? Maybe we'll save that for another time. Jim Turner says, we as employees are a commodity and I'm rarer than most, so I'm harder to replace and worth more. So to answer your question, new starter or greenhorn won't normally get the same treatment. Here's the point. So, Jim, you've got your whatever it is. Let's say you've got 2 decades of experience under your belt. You are harder to replace. You're worth more. But you're cast in stone. But your son, let's use your son as an example. And I realise he's got your advice in his ears and everything else. But let's take somebody, either your son or somebody of his age. He comes on board. He starts work with an employer, and the employer, pretty much from day one, starts to heap more and more and more responsibilities upon them. And sooner or later, by the time your son or the person of his age has got 5 years or 10 years under the belt, that additional responsibility, training the newcomers and everything else, that is now then, it's the new normal. Are we staring down the barrel because of the generational shift within the industry? Are we staring down the barrel of a workforce that is basically expected to work 6 and a bit days a week, to learn new systems in their own time, to work 10, 11, 12 or more hours a day? Is that the precedent that we're allowing to be set? Chris Ford says, I had my eyes checked for the first time earlier this year, slightly down on my left eye. Yeah, the worst day's work I ever did was wearing reading glasses. I started wearing reading glasses, guess what, for reading. And since I've done that, my eyesight has got gradually worse and worse and worse. Now, because I'm diabetic, I do go, in actual fact, I've got my eye screening coming up at the end of this month. As far as the diabetic eye screening is concerned, my eyes are in perfect health. Or they have been up until now, which is fantastic stuff. However, my eyes are getting worse and worse and worse. And the type that I'm using as the script on this machine, I think it's, since I started this show, it's already a couple of points larger. Jim says, unless they're a really good person with obvious potential and a brilliant work ethic. Should Nocken plant cards have eyesight tests to obtain your card? As you get these hearing tests, etc., for your medical? Yeah, I wonder. Mick says, glad you said that bit, Jim. I know a lot of people who blow their own horn a bit too loud. Learned a long time ago, no one is irreplaceable. Yeah, absolutely right. And isn't that part of the thing? And I tip my hat in Jim's direction because of the way he is and the way that he goes about his business. But ultimately, nobody is irreplaceable. And if, as Jim described it, if he were to take the hump, there's probably an expression for that up in his part of the world, but down where I am, if you took the hump, if you went right the other way and went to your employer and went, hang on a minute, pal, you're taking the piss here, and you couldn't resolve that, despite, Jim's intrinsic value, if Jim said, no, fuck it, I'm off, just threw in the towel and walked out the door, how long to replace him? Day? 2 days? A week? Maybe? There's no guarantee that his replacement would be as good or as, as experienced, but replaceable, he most certainly is, as are we all. We could train a monkey to do my bleeding job. Let's face it, they largely have. Dan Cullen says, I get my eyes tested every year. Fair play. You're a glasses wearer. In my head, you wear glasses, Dan. Or is it sunglasses you've always got on your noggin? I can't remember. Jim Turner says, me and the lad don't get on at the moment, so I couldn't have him with me. I know his potential and his talent, but he's acting like a daft, lazy kid. He needs to grow up. Been there, done that. The weird thing is, and Dan does wear glasses. Thanks. I think my memory was starting to fail me. The weird thing with that, I remember saying to my dad, I mentioned this a day or two ago. My dad used to work early hours of the morning, late at night, because he was a chauffeur. He was always on duty. He'd work weekends and various other bits and pieces. And I actually said to him, "You're a mug. You are. I was a teenager at the time. You're a mug. You are. All this work you do. Oh, you're a mug." And he basically took it on the chin and went, well, yeah, we'll see how it works out. Well, I work 6 and 7 days a week. And I had the conversation with my son, who said something along the lines, you're a mug, you are, all these hours you work. My son has got more of a work ethic than me. He was at the doctor's earlier this week because basically he was, I went to pick him up to take him to the hospital because he was so dizzy. Took him off to the hospital. He was sick while he was at the hospital. They found out that he had something wrong with his ears and he had bleeding in his ears and his balance was all off and everything else. He took about a day and a couple of hours off work and he's back at it because that's what you do, isn't it? And he works for the David Lloyd and the David Lloyd health clubs, which, they're a good employer. He's well paid and they look after him. And he's been to Dubai as a result of working with them and stuff like that. There's career progression, but they regularly hold quiz nights out of hours. He's expected to host that. They have events where they have like a guest singer or comedian. That's out of hours. Yeah, he's expected to host that as well. You can see that effectively expectation and exploitation everywhere. Mick says, and me, Dan, but a bit more like bloody telescopes. Right, shirt and tie on, so I'm sodding off. Have a good day, gents. See, Mick does this thing properly. He's going down the pub in a shirt and tie. Mick, proper, says the guy sat here in a pair of t-shirt and a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. Best of luck, Mick, says Dan, that's the final comment of the day. I think we're done. I think that is enough of all this. I'm going to be back tomorrow. I may well, I'm not entirely sure, but I might be talking about kind of an extension to this. I might be talking about bullying. I haven't actually decided 100%, but I have started to do some research on bullying in the workplace in general, but bullying in the workplace in construction and demolition in particular. If you fancy having a chat about that, please join us tomorrow. One final thing that I will say is I'm now going to take the recording from this and I'm going to feed it through an AI and see what the hell the AI makes of this after show chat. If it's any good, I'll put it out. If it's not, I shall dump it and we will never speak of it again. But I'm not initially, because I'm still learning, I'm not going to make it public. It will be available. I'll drop you a link in WhatsApp. It will be available over on our Buy Me a Coffee page. You don't have to pay for it. Just doing it as a test. But I'll put it over there and I'll drop you a link to it so you can listen back to see if you get a mention in dispatches, to see if your comments rose to the top like the cream that we all know you are. Everybody, until Jim Turner says, yesterday AI was very entertaining. Yeah, well, Jim's obviously listened to it. Jim's comments, which are always valuable. I mean, all your comments are valuable, but Jim's bubbled to the surface. The AI actually picked out a couple of Jim's comments and pushed them to the top. So I'm hoping it's going to do the same again, not just with Jim, but with Dan and Mick and Chris and everybody else. So watch this space, or not this space, but watch our WhatsApp later in the day, because hopefully we'll have a new podcast episode just between us for the time being, and you may well get a mention in it. Till then, everybody, have a fabulous day. I'll see you tomorrow. All the best.